Hello and welcome to Peaceful at Heart. My name is Cedric Martin and I'll be your host. Each episode will take a look at the book Peaceful at Heart, Anabaptist Reflections on Healthy Masculinity. We'll jump into the chapters, hear from the authors, and think a little bit more about what healthy masculinity means in our modern context. Joining us today is Kurt Horst. Kurt, welcome and thank you so much for writing this chapter so we could talk about this today. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Still in COVID-19, had my times of isolation and had it all around me, but I'm positive about being negative. I'm doing okay.
Good. I'm glad to hear that, Kurt. I really appreciated your perspective and your historical approach to your chapter. At the beginning of your chapter, you mentioned that you wrote some study guides for men's groups and you've given a few seminars about men's issues. Have you seen an increase, decrease, or maybe no change over your years of ministry in regards to the interest around men's issues?
I'd say I'm a bit disappointed in that it just stays about the same. There are times when it seems like there's a little interest coming, but not a lot of change. I've lobbied when I could for men's issues and questions about men's involvement in church to be part of pastor seminars, but it always seems like something else is deemed more important. So hasn't changed a lot, I don't feel like, in the years that I've been paying attention to it.
Okay. So I guess that kind of leads into my next question, which is, what sort of role does masculinity play in your faith maybe, but in the church as well?
That's not an easy question. And I note that you used masculinity in the singular, and everything I've read recently calls us to use it in the plural because there is no singularity of masculinity. And even within Christian circles, there's all the way from wild at heart, save a beautiful woman and fight off the bad men, or the movement toward a much more gentle masculinity. So within the church, we'll probably get to this a little further into the questions, but when we take Jesus as the model, the question of masculinity, I think, moves a little bit to the side, and spirituality needs to move to the top. We are all different, and I'm not inclined to put masculinity into one definition or into a box. I think that's really been destructive for us.
Yeah, for sure. In your chapter, Kurt, you share a lot of great information about fatherhood, and now we're thinking a little bit broader than just about the individual, but and being a man around the time of the Industrial Revolution. You share about that there was a family business and that everyone would work together. Through 2020 and now 2021, as you mentioned, through our COVID times, work from home has become a new reality for many families. Do you think that a shift could occur where men begin to think more about being family first instead of work first, or any other shifts that you're hoping for that could come out of this change?
Yeah, I think there's real good potential for changes, discoveries. A couple of observations about that, though. One of them is that I think those changes are kind of forced on us. They're likely to happen where there are two-parent households.
Sure.
But at this point, probably 50% of the households in the U.S., I don't know about Canada, I don't think it's quite that high, are not two-parent households. And so for men to be making discoveries is only going to happen in those households. But the other statistic that I just learned, I thought it was probably true, but I went chasing it, is that 75 to 80% of what are being called essential jobs are held by women. school teachers, just the variety. And so there will be a lot of places where men are working from home. And when we do, we make some unique discoveries. But are we willing to change? Or are we just looking forward to getting it back to normal? So I think there's real potential.
But we have to allow that change to happen within ourselves and within our communities. And
that takes some kind of character traits that aren't part of cultural masculinity always. Humility, gentleness, self-examination. Those are essential to change, and we might discover how much of that we really have.
Yeah, for sure. With you mentioning about the fact that about half of the households are single parent households in the U.S. And also in your chapter, you say, I wonder where future generations of young men will learn about healthy masculinity and masculinities, shared gender roles. Where do you think we need to start? Is there things that our church communities could be doing, maybe specifically around single parent families?
Well, we certainly have to be aware of the kind of unique dynamics that are part of single families. And I think about 75 to 80% of single families are headed by women, maybe 20% by men. I think one of the things that we need to begin to be aware of is that if we're going to have an impact on the discovery, particularly by young men who are growing up without fathers, we're going to have to do it away from church. We can do neighborhood things, and we can have neighborhood carnivals and bring our neighbors to church with us. But I think men volunteering in community organizations, it's got to be beyond the church. We've got to look outside of the walls of the church. And healthy men can do that, but we have to oftentimes change the way we even think about ourselves and our work in order to make that priority. I've just recently retired. I think about it, but I haven't really found the places yet. But I think men in retirement, healthy men in retirement, have real opportunities.
No, that's great. That does give a bit of hope of where we need to go and thinking about our sort of our next generations and where can we tap into that, I guess, and finding those opportunities. I hope for you yourself, you find those opportunities and find what you're looking for, Kurt.
I think one of the other observations I make is that as I listen, I think within the African American community, there's much more awareness as I listen to African American pastors and church leaders. They're showing us a way. We need to learn.
Yeah, we need to learn. We need to listen. Absolutely.
Right.
Kurt, I'm wondering, as you think about ways that you could tap into your healthy manhood and sharing with the community, what role models for you did you have growing up? And did they leave an impact on your vision for, I would say healthy masculinity, but you're changing my outlook. It's a healthy spirituality, right?
Right. That's an interesting question for me. Not one that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. I grew up in rural, small town, Midwest. Gender roles were pretty traditional. So that what my children are experiencing and what I experienced to be a more urban setting, very different. So the roles I grew up with were traditional. There were kind of clear definitions. This is men's field. This is women's field. More like what I write about in the book, where dad goes off to work. I tell the story in the book about our son who, when he was 4 and I was a pastor, was asked, where does your dad work? And he said, my dad doesn't work. He just goes to meetings. His uncle and his grandpa put on their work clothes and went to work, and I didn't do that.
Yeah.
But I grew up with pretty traditional roles. I think probably for me, the sense of looking at those roles and doing some reading and being willing to say those probably need adjustment has been powerful. So it's almost been, it's not anti-roles, because I had good role models, I think, but my dad was a workaholic,
Sure.
as I have been much of my life. And so the role, however, was, though, he had time for coaching. He had time to go to my games. If there was a ball involved, I was involved. And there were other persons at church who gave quite a bit of time to the kind of activities that my friends, pretty well all male, because it was pre Title IX in the U.S. There weren't the same opportunities for young women to be involved in sports and even quite the same in clubs. I was thinking about it at church. We had boys club and we had girls club, and then we had the baseball team. And about the only thing we did together was the children's choir. And there were never enough boys in the children's choir. Yeah, role models was an interesting question for me.
So, Kurt, I'm wondering, what are healthy ways in which you see men expressing spirituality through action?
One of the interesting things to me in my reading about men has been that in multiple cultures, what some have called the lead man in various cultures, a mark of them that there are lots of negatives sometimes, but generosity stood out in discovering what makes a man a leader and attractive. And that would be for me generosity with time as much as with money and resources. I've said already that the need to get involved in volunteer settings and beyond church, not just at church. In fact, I try as a pastor to find ways to encourage people to understand that ministry is probably more what you do outside of the congregation than it is what you do inside the congregation. Serving on the church board, there's a ministry in that, but there are many places to get involved beyond. And when we get involved outside of our normal little cocoon, there are major opportunities for discovery about ourselves, about our neighborhood. So I think that those are the places that we need to get involved, even if it's just a volunteer fire company.
Yeah.
That's often not as much as it used to be, but often a mainly male setting. And when you work shoulder to shoulder and work hard together, there's often times then to sit and talk, and part of our lives opens up. Men don't do so well face to face. We do well shoulder to shoulder. And then I think that opens up some significant opportunities for impact in our communities.
The spirit of camaraderie, the spirit of I'm in this with you.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that makes sense. Kurt, I want to thank you very much for your time. But before we go today, did you have any sending thoughts to send us into our day?
Well, one of the things as I was preparing for this interview that I had not thought about for quite a while is that in terms of masculinity and cultural dynamics of masculinity, there's a phrase that I think her name is Susan Faludi. I don't know if I pronounced her last name right, but she was doing an interview with Sylvester Stallone. who those of us who are older know Rocky. And he talked about being in the weight room, standing in front of the mirror, trying to get himself ready for this part. And I don't know if it was his phrase or her phrase, but it was ornamental masculinity. Deciding that I'm going to look like and what male models. And I would challenge all of us to take those images and evaluate them and realize that it's not trying to be somebody, it's being a follower of Jesus. And our model is Jesus. And I've said and tried to say in various places, spirituality is spirituality. Men have very different roads to following Jesus than women, but that's our model. And put on Jesus and be careful about putting on all the other models of masculinity that we find from all kinds of places. We're just bombarded with them.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I hope that makes sense to our listeners as well. Thank you very much, Kurt. You send us with a sense of hope and a sense of let's put Christ first. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope you have a great day.
You too. Thanks, Cedric.
Peaceful at Heart was recorded in the city of Takaranto, the land covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. This is the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. We all eat out of the dish, and all of us that share this territory with one spoon. We want to acknowledge the ancestral lands and waterways of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Seneca, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Takaranto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We wish to thank them and any other nations who cared for this land. Colonization is a continuing form of oppression, so it is important that we acknowledge the lands and digital spaces that we are holding and taking up. We remember the acknowledged and unacknowledged, recorded and unrecorded, past, present, and future. We are all treaty people.